We'll start out here. I want to thank all of you for coming out. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, we thought it might be interesting to have a conversation with our commissioners across generational lines here. And of course, Black History Month and Women's History Month provided a perfect opportunity to do that. So we have with us Commissioner Donna Miller, who's beginning her second term in office, and Commissioner Monica Gordon, who's one of our 3 women who were elected in this cycle, new to the body, right? All right, thank you. So I'm going to give each of them a chance to kind of introduce themselves, and then we'll have a conversation. We'll start with you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam President. Do we need a microphone? I always hate it when people say, do we need
That's why
one?
I tried to make people come up front.
We do or we don't? No? Okay, great. Well, I'm Cook County Commissioner Donna Miller. Thank you all for coming today. It's great to see you, and thank you, Madam President, for putting this together. I represent the 6th District. I'm going to my second term. The 6th District is all suburban Cook County, so I think I have one of the unique distinctions of representing only south and southwest suburbs and no city of Chicago. I'm originally from Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, not in the suburbs. And I get to tease my children that when they say they're from Chicago, I'm like, no, you're from Linwood. You are not from Chicago, because people from Chicago take it very personally to say that you are from Chicago versus the suburbs, but now I'm in the suburbs. But I'm happy to represent the 6th District. I came into office from a career in the biotech pharmaceutical industry. I went to Howard University for undergrad, and I'm also proud to say my son is there now. And I guess we'll get into some more things as time goes on.
There we go. All right, Commissioner Gordon.
Hi everyone, my name is Monica Gordon. I am the Commissioner of the 5th District. The 5th District is about 49% of the city of Chicago and 51% of the south suburbs. So I got a really cool mixture of both. I am originally from the west side of Chicago, so I'm from Chicago as well. I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews who are mostly from the city, and they have a little experience in the suburbs, but not much. So I came from medical devices, medical sales. I also did pharmaceutical sales, and also was the ED of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation. And most recently, I was Director of Government Relations with Chicago State University. And I'm really excited. This is my first term. I'm excited to get things done and really make an impact in my district. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my colleague here, Donna Miller.
All right, let's begin with you. What brought you to public service, to elective office?
So what I would say, when I was in medical sales, I was mostly into national politics, not too much on the state level. Then I started getting involved with the League of Women Voters. And I had a close friend who worked for a state senator who invited me out to some programs and events on the south side of Chicago. So I became intrigued. So I went to lobby in Springfield. I actually lobbied for a session for free to learn how everything works, to learn the legislative process. And then that's how I became the executive director of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus Foundation.
Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. Well, so since I went to undergrad in DC, I worked on Capitol Hill for 2 years. So when I tell you who I work for, you know why we're multi-generational here. I worked for Senator Alan Dixon, and so I was always a behind-the-scenes person. So I thought I was going to have a career as a staff person on the Hill. And I did get an offer when I graduated from college, and I was all excited. And then my parents told me that wasn't enough money because they weren't going to buy me a car. And I was like, wait, what? How am I going to live then? I can't live in DC, and now it's even worse. It's way more expensive. But I was always a behind-the-scenes person. I worked on a lot of campaigns. I got to tell President Biden that I was one of the young people knocking on doors when he ran for president, way back when. That was in the way back when, so a long time ago. So I was always a behind-the-scenes person working on campaigns. I never thought that I would be a political person to hold an office. I thought I would just help people run for office on policy issues and things that I cared about. And then my grandfather held a political office on a statewide level. He was Secretary of Aging, the actually first Secretary of Aging for the state of Pennsylvania. So I've always been around it in my family, and I've always been politically motivated just because of what I've seen, and also because of the issues that I champion. So then when I came back to Chicago, I was on the East Coast for several years, and I came back to Chicago, worked on some campaigns here, and I was always involved helping candidates raise money, helping knock on doors, helping do strategy. And then when this office became, well, first I ran for state senate, and that was an unsuccessful run. So I say, hey, you know what, I didn't give up. I tried again, and I came back and ran for this seat because I was in the medical field and healthcare was important to me, and knowing that we had one of the largest hospital systems in the entire country, I thought I could use some of my expertise in that area. So one of my other funny stories is I say that, I actually called on Cook County Hospital when I was a drug rep, pharmaceutical rep, drug rep, and talked about some of the issues that we had related to healthcare and making sure that we had the best healthcare available for people in Cook County. So that was a conversation that was different on that end because we talked a lot about pharmacoeconomics and how to make the system better and how to make sure the right medicine got to the right people. And always the right people are not necessarily people who have the most money, but they are the people who are in the most need. And so I thought that I could help that conversation by being in this office. So when I ran for this office, that was one of the things that was most important to me. So being behind the scenes, now I'm really focused on helping sure that there's more young people involved in politics on every level, whether you're behind the scenes or running for office, but you have to have something that you care about and stand for. And so those are the things that led me to be here today.
All right. So I'm really feeling old. Oh, Lord. All right, so I started working in campaigns when I was 16. Some of you have heard this story before. My high school social studies teacher got me to work for Katie McWatt, who was the first African-American woman to run for city council in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I grew up. And so we would go after school and stuff envelopes and make phone calls and collect yard signs to try to get our friends and neighbors to put in their yards. All the things you do in campaigns. Unfortunately, Katie McWatt didn't win, and actually a couple of years ago she passed away after a life of activism and commitment to social justice. I don't think she ever ran for office again, but so that was when I was 16. As many of you know, I ran for alderman twice before I was elected. So I got elected to office when I was 43. So I always like to say that I spent 30 years of my life working for other good people before I ever got elected myself. And that was both instructive and I think really helpful to me in the arc of my political life. I worked for a lot of good people, some of whom won, some of whom didn't. But I learned a lot about campaigning and a lot about good candidates. And that was really helpful to me when I got elected on my third try. I had a little more experience losing than she did. On my third try in 1991. And then I spent, as you know, almost 20 years in the city council in Chicago before taking on this job in 2010. So.
And I want to point out that I also had a unsuccessful run for state senate before too, I made a positive run.
Yeah, I think first-time candidates have a hard time mustering both neighborhood support and the financial support they need to win. So if you're going to run for elective office, you got to kind of steel yourself to the fact that the odds are pretty stacked against you. And if you really want to do this, you got to keep at it. It's true. All right, Commissioner Miller, who did you find inspiring in your political career as you move through life?
Well, anyone who knows me knows I take a great deal of pride talking about my family, but everyone in my family was politically involved. So from knocking on doors to just making sure you get out to vote, which we all know that's a hard conversation sometimes too, just to make sure you do get out and vote. So back in the day, my great-grandmother was a precinct captain. She knocked on doors in her neighborhood, got people organized to go out and vote, and I took that as just something that everybody should do. And I didn't really know people didn't do that until I talked to other people who told me they didn't even vote, and I was appalled and shocked and horrified. But as I moved through political life and got to know other people, I was fortunate to meet Maxine Waters along the way, and she is very inspiring. And I always say that the reason why we all come into public office is because we care about something. And Maxine Waters got in the office because she cared about Head Start program for kids. And until somebody brings something as an issue, you don't know there's a problem. Like, so someone has to say, did you know that people couldn't get into Head Start programs? And everybody's like, no, I didn't know that. So anyway, so that's how she got in, and she started by making sure that she raised her voice on that. And that was before she held office. So people do things before they hold office, and then they continue it to make legislation about it, and then they can continue their career. So I look at her as just an inspiration, and some of us have seen all the wonderful things she's done to make sure our voices get heard as African American women and as women who hold political office. So during the Trump campaign, she did not bite her tongue at all. And I got to sit next to her at the CBC dinner a couple of years ago when Trump was in office. Yeah, I went to that one. But, and she said, you know what? Don't ever forget to make sure to let people know what you care about. And if you don't, even if it's not popular, make sure you talk to people about what you care about. So that meant a lot to me. That was before I held office, but that meant a lot to me as just a person, as a black woman, as a person who cares about issues, to hear that from someone as iconic as her. And so I carry that with me. But there's other people along the way, but I'd say right now she's number one.
Well, as a kid, right after undergrad, I volunteered for the West Side branch of the NAACP, so I got to work alongside Vera Davis, who was not elected. She's the wife of Danny Davis. I would say one of the people that I looked up to, I was a big reader growing up. So I kind of escaped my world reading about everything else. And people don't understand, you can find anything you want to find out or anything you want to learn just by opening a book. So I was very just impressed with Shirley Chisholm, who, you know, was a state rep, a representative, U.S. representative, and she ran for president of the United States. And if you know the time she ran for president of the United States, you can imagine how many people were in her ear like, girl, are you crazy? What are you thinking? And she believed in herself. She had this confidence. And some of the things that I believe, and I have a mantra, confidence, courage, and camaraderie. And the belief that you can do anything that you set your mind to, it kind of sets the stage for excellence and for what we're talking about today, which is Black excellence. So that's someone I looked up to, but there are many more people that I continue to look up to, like Carol Mosley Bryan. The two women that I'm sitting here with, just many trailblazers that allow me to, you know, not have to make some of the mistakes. I can learn from them. So going back to what I stated before, you can find any information about anything by just reading and opening up a book, and just, now we have the World Wide Web. So even if you're not blessed enough to have those role models in your family or your upbringing, there's still an opportunity to gain that, to gain that information and that wisdom.
I told you a little bit about Katie McWatt. When I was a young teacher in my 20s, it was the early 70s, and the impeachment hearings were on, Judiciary Committee hearings were on every night. Well, they were televised during the day. Richard Nixon was being impeached. They were televised during the day, and then those of us who had worked during the day could hear kind of recaps in the evening. I was teaching American history at the time, and I would, at home every night, I would listen to whatever went on that day in the impeachment hearings, and then come back and talk with my class the next day. I thought it was a great lesson for them in the workings of American democracy. And the most impressive person on the House Judiciary Committee for me was Barbara Jordan. And Barbara Jordan was a congresswoman from Texas. I don't know if any of you have ever heard her speak, but she has a certain majesty, I guess is the best word. Very smart, very deliberate, thoughtful person. And I thought, she's a good role model for me. And so I was, many of you know that she had a debilitating disease. I'm not sure if it was multiple sclerosis or what. And ended up leaving Congress and going to the University of Texas to be a professor in the law school there. But I have always been very impressed by her. And I think she was the earliest person that I looked at and thought, this is the kind of public servant you should be. So. All right, Commissioner Miller, what would you say to your younger self about involvement in politics or how to get where you are now?
I think to my younger self, I would say stay true to the issues that you care about. And that's only because, not that I haven't stayed true to them over time, but I think there's a way to amplify them. And as a young person, you don't think that one person matters sometimes. You think you might be alone in what you're thinking, or you're the only person who ever thought that, so it must be wrong, or it's not popular, or it's not right. And I would just say to my younger self, just keep going on that path earlier so that you can get more done with the limited time we have here. So I think sometimes young people second guess themselves a little bit too much. But when we look throughout history and we look at all the things that happened, most of those were spurred by young people. And the other generations of us, we follow them. And I see a little resurgence of that a little bit now with what's happening. So young people are leading the way on so many social issues. And sometimes when I talk to them, I'm like, we're in good hands as long as we can get, as long as they can get us to do what they need us to do, right? So I would tell my younger self, just continue on that path. Don't give up, don't get sidetracked. Sometimes you get sidetracked by money or career or family, and time is not in your favor all the time. So I would tell my young self to just keep going and don't look at the clock moving forward. Just keep doing what you think is important.
Well, something I would tell my young self is change, and it sounds cliche, but change does really begin with you. You can make an impact in anything you believe in, just have that passion. And you don't have to be well connected, you don't have to know people who maybe are, people who are famous or people who are public servants. I want to use one of the colloquial terms of my generation. I got it out the mud. It started with me. So, and you can do the same thing. So that's what I would tell my younger self.
What I say now is, particularly when I'm talking about social justice issues in this country, is that, when the first African Americans were brought to this country in 1619, there were people who said enslavement is wrong. This is a terrible idea, right? And the abolitionists worked for 250 years in this country to end enslavement. 250 years, which means that people worked on challenges or problems they saw in society that they might not see a good solution to in their own lifetime. That you just have to do what you can in your time on this earth and trust that good people coming behind you will continue those efforts. And 250 years is a long time. 250 years is a long time. And likewise, there were advocates for the franchise for women very early on, right? And it was hundreds of years before we got to that point too, right? Mm-hmm. So it's hard when you're young to be patient and to have a long view of history, but it's important. It keeps you from being too frustrated because you want everything to happen tomorrow or the next day, and it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day. So. All right, Monica, what do you want to say to the audience before we start taking questions?
I want to say that Black history is a rich history. We have centuries of excellence to teach our children. One of the things I was very fortunate to do when I was younger is I participated in the Know Your Heritage Quiz Bowl in 7th and 8th grade. I'm very proud to say I was #1 in the preliminary rounds for both years. But what that did for me, I needed to know my history because I needed to know what I can do. Unfortunately, we see these images on TV. We hear about so many negative things about our people. And Black history, the importance of Black history, I hear some celebrities saying things like we don't need Black history, and I disagree with that. That is a false statement because it teaches you that you can do anything you want. Seriously, you can do anything you want. Imagine what we went through. 400 years of captivity, and still we're they created a stoplight, becoming millionaires from hair care products. Anything we want to do versus entertainment, politics, whatever you choose to do, you can do it because you come from a rich legacy of excellence. So, and also it increases your work ethic. When you know you can achieve anything, you're going to work hard for it. We need to become a limitless society. There's no limit to what we can do. So I just want to say to everybody, let's continue this rich heritage that we have. Let's continue to be proud of it. Let's exploit it. Let's scream about it, because we are a great people. We've made major contributions to this country and this globe. So that's what I would like to say, everyone. Let's continue to embrace the importance of Black history.
So, I'm glad to know you were number one in the history book. And I hope that schools still do stuff like that.
They do it for the high schools. I'm not sure if they still do it for elementary schools.
Yeah, well, that's how we learn it. But I think, you know, it being Black History Month, I always say we have to find ways to reinvent ourselves, but you can't do that without knowing your history. You have to know where you came from in the first place. So one of the things I do during every Black History Month is post information about different places that happened in Black history. I call it Black history in our own backyard, because there's a lot of Black history that happens right here, and we're fortunate enough to have a lot of it in Cook County. So Cook County Forest Preserve is a stop on the Underground Railroad, a designated stop, which maybe many people did not know. We have trails throughout the Forest Preserve that identify areas that were designated stops on the Underground Railroad. In the south suburbs, there were farms that abolitionists had, and tunnels and cabins. Some of them are still there. One of the cabins is actually in Sandridge Forest Preserve. That was a place that the slaves were escaping, and they stopped at this cabin. And if you go see the waterway, if you kind of trace where the water is, it makes sense, right? People came up from the south, they had to go along the water, the Calumet River, then it goes to the port. If you go down 94 on the Bishop Ford, that big port that's there, that area was also a stop, and that goes up to Canada. So I just think we all need to learn about something that could be right in your own backyard, it could be in your neighborhood. There's so many things surrounding us. I also got the privilege this year of going back to, we went to the same high school, Lane Tech. So Lane Tech honored Fritz Pollard, who was the first Black coach in the NFL. And Lane Tech, he went to Lane Tech in like the early 1900s. And then he went on, became a football coach and many other things, but came from a family that lived up in Ravenswood. So we have so much rich history right here that we don't know, or we don't know to take advantage of. And that's one of the things I think we could all empower ourselves. I say everybody has a story to tell of some kind within your own family or in your own neighborhood, and tell those stories. I am a big teller of stories. I love sharing whatever information I have about all of these things, because it is a rich history. And I also say, you know, our history didn't start with slavery. So as we know that in America, you know, some people forget that there was a past. So I'm fortunate on the other side, my stepmother's from Ethiopia. They have a completely different view and rich history that we can't even imagine talking about, because they know their history for decades, generations and generations and generations beyond. But when they come to our country, and then they get just to have to assimilate to American culture and be labeled as African Americans, I always say she's very clear, she's not African American, she's Ethiopian American. And so when we can know that there's people who take pride in things like that, it's not just because our history did not start with slavery, because we have a whole rich history beyond that. So one of the things that I want to make sure is our children know their history as much as they can, and that they're surrounded by people who want to encourage them to be proud of their history. And I really feel like we're seeing a bit of a resurgence on that level, but it's a hard-fought battle to come across right now.
And I do want to say one thing. I'm so grateful to serve on this board. Because, and I say this all the time, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Madam President. From history teacher to history maker, I'm serving on a board that's led by the first Black woman county board president. So we live. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
So the first 10 years of my working life, I was a history teacher. I taught American history and African American history, Black history, and geography, all kinds of stuff, civics. You know, and I have mixed feelings about Black History Month because, you know, African American history is American history, and sort of segmenting it, say this little box is African American history, does a disservice to all of us, right? But I'll tell you a story. Whenever I started my history classes, whether it was Black history or American history, I would ask, the first assignment was for the young person in class to go home or call on the telephone the oldest member of their family that they could get in touch with, and ask that person to tell them about their life, you know, kind of what happened to them. And then come back, that their first assignment was to give a report back on that person's life. And, you know, they talked to their grandparents. If they were lucky, they had great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, whatever. And I would share with them, I said, you have to understand this is history, right? History is not some dead thing in a book. It's about the lives of real people, just like the members of your family. And, you know, sometimes the young people would say, you know, I never sat down and talked to my grandfather, you know, about his life or what he'd done. And so it was an interesting experience, I think, for them, and of course, whoever they spoke with. But making history come alive was what I always tried to do with my students, and hopefully that made it interesting to them. So. All right, questions. Questions. And I used to say, you know, if nobody asks questions, I'll start calling on people. All right, Brady, thank you.
Just to save everybody some embarrassment. All right.
Think of your question.
Yes, this is for actually the three of you. All three of you are tremendous Black women who've been incredibly successful. I imagine that somewhere online, there's going to be a young Black girl watching this video, wondering how she can become like you. What advice would you give to someone who's a teenager or entering their young adulthood who wants to believe that they can change the world, but doesn't know how to start or where to start?
Well, the first thing I would say is that you should work in a political campaign. So you get a taste of what it's really like. You know, I always say, you know, there's sort of campaigning and there's governing. They're not the same. But if you're not willing to be a candidate and campaign, it's hard to be in a government position, right? So you have to know whether you like campaigns. And this is a great time for young people. Municipal elections are Tuesday, and there'll be runoff elections in April for mayor and a lot of our aldermanic seats. So, and I always say, in every election, there's at least one good person that you can find that you want to work for, right? So I encourage young people to be involved in politics. You don't have to be 18 years old, which is voting age. You know, you can, believe me, they'll take volunteers of whatever age. And there's always something. I mean, if it's stuffing envelopes, it's making phone calls, you know, door knocking. You can do that however old you are. So that would be my advice.
I echo that. I do think they should make that a class, that all students have to participate in a political campaign. But I think another thing is find whatever you're passionate about and you can turn that into something. So I was fortunate to have an intern this past summer from MICVA, so that's another thing. I would say join MICVA if you're interested in politics at all.
Why don't you tell them about MICVA?
MICVA is an organization that takes young people from high school and puts them to work in campaigns or in political offices. And they go through a whole process. It's not just the internship part. It's also they go to classes, they take them on field trips, they do a lot. And it's called MICVA Challenge. So it's high school students. And I've met some wonderful young people through MICVA. And the one that I had last year was that she wasn't sure exactly what she was interested in. And this is why I say if you have a little inkling of something that you care about, she cared about the environment. So now it just so happens to turn out that because she got exposed to a lot of different things during her internship, she changed her major focus that she wants to major into environmental health care. So I just think that when you have something you care about, if you care about animals, there's policies about that. If you care about the trees, there's policies about that. Whatever you care about, healthcare, there's policy. Find something you care about and you can advocate for it. You can find people that want to support you in that. And you can also go work for it or volunteer for it if you don't want to turn it into a career. But I think there's a lot of opportunities for young people because of the internet and because they can be connected even on a global level to see what's happening beyond just right here. And they can make a big difference in things that they care about. So I just say, find what you're passionate about, lean into that passion, and go work for it.
And I would say continue to be curious. Learn about all things. I would say stay on top of current events. When I was younger, I interned for WGN under Allison Payne. There's also being a volunteer and being an intern is great experience. I know the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association has a boot camp, a training boot camp where you can learn the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts of campaigning. That's a great opportunity. I would say also the importance of obtaining mentors. And not just obtaining mentors, but also people we call sponsors who are fierce advocates for your career and your progression, who will help find you opportunities as well. So I think that's very important. And just to piggyback off Commissioner Miller and Madam President, there's also the Judy Snyder, that's a congressional fellowship. There's just many opportunities out there. Starts with Google. You can research and find different opportunities, but also things at home. I mentioned before, I also volunteer for my community branch of the NAACP, just to get a handle on specific issues.
Yes.
I have a question. So thank you all for this opportunity to speak with all of you today on this panel.
Introduce yourself to people who might not.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Melva Brownlee, Chief of Staff for Cook County Commissioners, 2nd District, Dennis Deere, the best district in the county. I'm joking, y'all. It's lunchtime. But anyway, no, I wasn't joking about that district. But my question is, seriously, what do you ladies see your legacy being in your roles in government? What do you want people to know for as your legacy, your defining point for your careers in government?
Okay. Well, since I spent 20 years in the city council and 12 years in this job, it's kind of hard to. When I was an alderman, the thing I was most proud of was rebuilding the communities that I served. We spent a lot of time on economic development and building housing. Just, you know, when I became alderman in the 4th ward, we had 3,000 vacant lots that the city owned in my ward, let alone what was privately held. So, you know, the city of Chicago has had this absolutely reprehensible, despicable policy of tearing down its housing stock. So when a building is abandoned, instead of trying to board it up and find somebody to fix it up, they, for generations, just tore buildings down. And you can see that all over the south and west side in the city of Chicago, in black and brown communities. We all should be ashamed. We've let our government destroy our housing stock. So what I did when I was alderman was try to rebuild. We always said we were trying to put back the missing teeth on Fox, you know. So that's what I'm proudest of. And it's not just physical rebuilding. You have to work on schools. We invest a lot of time and energy trying to improve the quality of education that our kids got. And of course, we've got to make the streets safe. That's the first thing. I always say when somebody walks in your office, the first thing they want to know is, are the communities safe? The next is, are there good schools? So those are the things I worked on most when I was alderman, and I'm proudest of. In this job, let's talk about the most recent event, and that's the passage of the referendum for the forest preserves. We had some wonderful allies and advocates, and they raised $3 million for a campaign to get a tax increase passed, which is always tough, right? And we got, I don't know what, 67%, 70% of the vote, something like that. Anyway, it won 2-1. And what that means for the forest preserves is $42 million a year, every year, going forward. That means we'll be able to catch up on our pension payments, do more acquisition, do more restoration. So I'm proud of that. I should start with that. You know, I think with the leadership of Lynetta and our team, you know, the good work that we've tried to do in criminal justice reform will be an important part of our legacy. You know, we have a profoundly racist criminal justice system. I always say, you know, that grinds up black and brown boys and men. And it's incumbent upon us to try to do something about that. And I'm encouraged at the moment. Lynette and I were at a meeting this morning with Jim Crown of the Crown family, and the Commercial Club, which is a group of prominent business leaders in the city, has created a task force to look at how they can impact the violence in the city. So we talked to them for an hour and a half this morning about what we wanted them to do. But criminal justice reform, public safety are critical issues for our city, not just now, but always. And we have to figure out how to tackle those in a compassionate way that doesn't demonize communities and prompts people to make investments that will make real change. So we can't just have, violence interrupters on the streets, although that's what we need. We have to make long-term investments in the communities that are the most violent. So that has to be economic development and job growth. So the criminal justice reform, on the healthcare side, and half of our budget is healthcare. I haven't felt there was a sort of straight line of improvement. Oh, Lord. In the criminal justice arena, I feel like we're sort of making incremental, progress. And this reflects, not surprising. I'm an elected official in democracy. I really believe in leadership. And I have said publicly that in the 12 years I've had this job, we had 6 leaders of our healthcare system, and only 2 of them were any good. Now that is not, from my perspective, that's been a tremendous challenge. Fortunately, one of them is Israel, so I'm in a good place. No, Israel is very committed to improving access to care and the quality of care that's delivered, and the ethics with which we deliver that care. I'll just leave it at that. So I'm really pleased at where we are. I wish I could say that it was a straight line getting there, but it hasn't been. It's been pretty much a roller coaster. But those are the kind of legacy obligations of the county: public health and public safety. We've done a lot of work around economic development and community development, but I think the 2 things that we've invested the most time in are criminal justice reform and our healthcare system. Now, we've got 2 recent initiatives which will hopefully be transformative as well, and that's our guaranteed income program, the largest one in the country, $42 million, 2 years, 3,250 families, and 233,000 households applied. 233,000 applied, and we could engage in our program 3,250 households. So there's a great need, and what we're trying to do is make the case for the federal government to do this, because the federal government has the resources to do this, and we don't really at the local level, at the magnitude that we need it done. And the second thing is medical debt, a $12 million government program to try to help people eliminate their medical debt. I think we're the only government in the country that's doing this. No, we're not. Maybe a couple more.
We're leading the way.
Pardon me?
We're leading the way, though.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I would say in terms of looking forward a little bit, what has the potential to be transformative are those 2 things. Our investment in guaranteed income, which actually I had to speak at my church last Sunday, and I was reminded that Martin Luther King, in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, in 1967, wrote about the importance of guaranteed income. That was 50 years ago. So, and credit where credit is due, the Black Panthers said everybody ought to have a guaranteed income or a guaranteed job. Guaranteed employment or guaranteed income or health. Yeah. Well, universal health care, yes. Anyway, we do what we can with the resources we have. We try to provide care for everybody who comes to our door, and what we need at the national level, thank you, Commissioner, is universal health care.
And I want to say, I am in my first term, but of course, there's so many things that I want to do. And I want to talk about healthcare, because I know this is something also Commissioner Miller is passionate about. We're both in the Southland, and we don't have a trauma center. So, and I know many people see that as a lofty goal, but I'm hoping along with other elected officials, we're able to make that happen in my lifetime. Also, and I'm being a little selfish, talking about some district-specific things that, need continuous work. The Southland's water infrastructure is definitely something that, I want to continue to push and lead until we're in a good place. Really, when I think about legacy work, it's really simple for me. Turning underserved communities into over-resourced communities. And that's how I think of it, and also, one of the things that keep me up at night is the death of children. When you have so many young people who don't even have a chance because they're killed by a gunshot or some other violent act, that's something else that, in my lifetime of service, I want to provide a solution that really combats this problem, eradicates this problem. So you think, back to what Madam President said, of public safety, of course, healthcare, water infrastructure, those are some of the things that are part of my legacy plan of service.
And I would just echo some of these same things, but add to, so I feel like my legacy is still evolving. And some of the things that I want to make sure continue to happen are making sure the South Suburbs gets all of the resources that it deserves. I feel like one of the things that I've wanted to be a champion of since I've been here is the programmatic things that all of you guys probably work on some level, everyone here at Cook County government. And Madam President did start a Southland, the Southland Development Authority. And I was very integral in the beginning phases of that to see that we could put resources and make the South Suburbs have the same things as the city of Chicago. And if anyone's ever heard me say anything before, there's 130 municipalities in Cook County, one is Chicago, which means the rest are not. So 36 of those reside in my district, and we want to get some of the same resources, and because of all the work that's happened here at Cook County, we're getting some of those resources and more of those resources coming to the Southland. And I'm sure the different departments that you work on, you see little pieces of that. But when people in the community, I think the other thing about what I want to make as a legacy is to get people more involved in what happens in their government. So when people are saying, I don't know anything about what happens at Cook County, I'm like, yes you do, because this happened and this happened and this, oh, that was Cook, yes. They don't put all the pieces together. And when I think of all the programs that we had, and if it wasn't highlighted anymore by having a pandemic of all the things that people need who didn't think they needed things or they weren't paying attention, what happens on a government level or political, they don't want to pay attention to that. You paid attention to it when we were all at home. And we all had to be locked in our house, and you couldn't even go to the grocery store. My husband's a dentist, you couldn't go to the dentist, you couldn't go places, like normally you go. But because of government, some of those got reopened for people, and those resources got directly into people's hands. And I like to remind people of that. So one of the things that I think is an important legacy is to realize the power of our Cook County government and what it means to your everyday life. And when people say they don't want to vote or they don't pay attention, all of us can remind them of how you might not be paying attention, but it did impact you on a level, a big level, on your everyday life. So the other things I want to continue as part of my legacy is the healthcare piece is big to me, and I've been focused for years on CPR training, so thank you all, any of you who came to any of the CPR trainings we've had over the years. But the reason is because we want to save people's lives. And one of the interesting statistics that I got before the pandemic was, the buildings that we're in right now, this building, the Daly Plaza, the Thompson Center when it was, fully functional, an ambulance came by there 8 times a day for cardiac-related events. And you can't imagine that. I mean, all of us probably can't imagine that. But of those 8 ambulance runs a day, someone didn't make it probably, which is really unfortunate. But this is where we can all take part in helping to save someone's life by initiating CPR. It's most prevalent in the Black community, that it's underutilized. People don't know CPR. It's called the bystander effect. So for all of us to get trained so that we can go out and save someone's life, that makes a big difference on what happens to change the outcomes of what happens in Cook County, so we can improve those outcomes. We have the #1 deaths due to cardiovascular disease here in Cook County, but it's across the whole country. So it's not just here in Cook County, it's everywhere. But we have the resources and the infrastructure and the people. I agree with Madam President, we have a great Cook County Department of Public Health as well as Cook County Health and Hospital to make an impact in changing what happens in people's lives on that level, and we can do that. So that's one of the things I want to see as seeing, you know, we have, like you say, we haven't seen the trajectory go up that much as far as from that standpoint, but we can see it go up if we can point to lives that were saved and outcomes that are increased.
Yes, Lisbeth.
Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Leaños. My question is, being female and minority, has there been ever a situation, which I'm sure you've all experienced, been in a room where you felt like you were not welcome, and how did you reclaim that power back?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
I'll go even beyond my elected life. I'll go back to my life in pharmaceutical sales. And that's something else me and Commissioner Miller have in common. So I remember being at a training. Well, no, it wasn't a training. We were having like a POA, plan of action. We have these quarterly meetings. And so we're doing this group exercise. And I'm all about the group exercises. I'm all about the group competitions, all these different skill sets put together to win, to be #1 out of the class. So we're doing this group exercise, and I'm actually stating, my opinion on what needs to be done. And not saying I was trying to take over the project, but it was certain aspects of the project that I knew we needed to do. I was completely ignored by one person, completely overlooked and ignored, as if for some strange reason, my answers or my solutions were not credible. I don't know what reason that could be. So, just complete, I had to be more aggressive, and I've learned to, and sometimes when people say black and brown women are overly aggressive, sometimes we learn in our professional life that in certain situations where we have to be. So I had to be aggressive because I had the confidence in my solution, and lo and behold, my solution was the accurate solution to propel us to victory. But that person really ignored me and really kind of diminished my credibility based on, how I looked.
And I'll say, we all heard the term mansplaining. So a lot of times that happens whether you're in government or not in government. And I always tell young women, like when we're sitting in a room, and sometimes someone says, just like what you said, either get ignored or they just said what you just said. Like, didn't I just say that? So, wait a second. So there's a way you have to bring the conversation back so you can say something like, well, yes, as Brian just said, and I said earlier, so, but it happens a lot. And then the other thing that happens is you get diminished in other ways that, take away your position. And whether you're a director, or you're leading a department, or you're commissioner, board president, I think, I joke that there should be a Facebook page like, can you believe somebody said this to me? I won't start it, but if anybody starts it, I'll add some comments to it. But sometimes you can't believe someone actually said that to you today. And all of us women probably know it happens every single day. So just the other day, I'll say what someone said to me on the board floor. He was like, you so cute, you must be a secretary. Wow. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. I didn't know what to say at first, but it's generational too. I mean, I'll give it to him, he was like 80 years old. But, and then I said, oh, not that there's anything wrong with being a secretary or being cute, but what do those two things have to do with each other in the workplace, right? So we have to just let people know how to bring it back and make it professional. And I always say I try to keep things professional and remind someone like that. There's a reason why we have our training classes so that people know how to say things. In one of the sexual harassment training classes that we had here at the county, an older gentleman, he said, I didn't know I'd been sexually harassing people all this time. So, but you have to be taught that. Because he's been saying things that are completely inappropriate that he should not have been saying. But thank God we have a training class now that he was now enlightened as to not say things. But it is an eye-opening experience, right? I mean, it is something that people have to be taught. They can learn, and it's not offensive if someone admits that they just didn't know that, or that they didn't know it was offensive, or they didn't realize they were talking over you, or they didn't realize they ignored you. So you just have to give gentle reminders sometimes.
Nick, we have time for one more question?
Last one.
Okay. All right, I'll give a quick story. I was in council chambers, back of council chambers, city council, talking to Dick Mell, and we're having this conversation, and all of a sudden he says, you know, girl, you don't mind if I call you girl, do you? I said, no.
Wow.
I said, no, you don't mind if I call you boy.
Amen, amen.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bob Chinnon of your Human Resources. I'd like to know how you describe your leadership style and what has led to your success as a leader.
Well, I'll go if that's okay. I'm big on emotional intelligence. I'm a people person, and I'm about really understanding the energy of others, leading with empathy, also leading with assertiveness. And I think one of the skills that has helped me propel, and we kind of discussed this earlier in the conversation, would be my skill of resilience. We all talked about how we lost previous races, but we were able to, you know, pick things back up, learn everything we could from the mistakes we made, or sometimes that situation or that seat just wasn't it wasn't meant for you. But really being able to, when things go wrong, you don't give up, especially when you are in elected office or you're trying to become an elected office. You're usually doing that because you're passionate about something, right? There's an issue that you're passionate about. There's some type of change you want to make. How can you give up on that change? You can't. And as was discussed earlier, you know, we know about change that was, you know, took 400 years. So you never give up on the issue. So resilience was very important. And I think another, maybe a competency besides EQ, maybe besides assertiveness, leading with compassion. I think also, you know, I'm big on really prioritizing time management. I could get better at it, of course. I really can, because, you know, you get so many things thrown at you. But, you know, I think there's also a lot of resources that kind of, there's resources available that helps us become better at those leadership competencies and being able to communicate. The communication is important as well. I want to add that to the list, if I answered your question.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll just say collaboration is a big focus of my leadership style. I like to work with people who want to do their job, and I want to let them do their job. And I believe that you know, everyone has expertise. I don't claim to know everything, and I want to lean into people's strengths so that they get to be productive and part of the whole team. I've led teams across the entire country, and I think that building the communication plan, making sure everybody's checking in, and that's part of collaboration, right? And also making sure that if someone is able to make a mistake, that you acknowledge it and learn from it. Not that you're gonna beat them down and it's over for you, your life is ruined. No, we can pick up the pieces, learn from the mistake, and move on, because there's so much still to do. And there's probably pieces of what you did to get to wherever you were that were correct, but then maybe the whole thing just didn't work. So I like to build all the pieces of the puzzle together. I like my team to be empowered to do what they think is important and bring it to me. I always say I don't know everything, so I don't want to know everything. I want to take your expertise, something you did, and I know one thing that always happened in our industry in the past was people took things from other companies and bring it over here, and then it's like new again. So you don't have to always start the wheel, you could reinvent the wheel. and just make it something that you build upon.
When I was alderman, I tried as hard as I could to be sure that we spent a lot of time at the beginning of projects engaging people, getting various stakeholders to come to the meetings, to talk about the issues that were in front of us, and to be as deliberate as possible about the decision-making. Because I always tell my staff, the more time we spend sort of engaging and involving people at the beginning, the less time we'll spend fighting guerrilla actions after we actually, start the work. Because you'll never have complete agreement, but if people have the sense that you're going to listen to them and that they see that you're trying to build consensus, that goes a long way toward the success of any project. The other thing is, probably because I'm a history teacher, when I face real challenges, I try to read up on things. Many of you have heard me say, I have a lot of books on the 1918 plague and then the most recent one. I can't say I've read them all, but I did read 2 books on 1918, and the basic message was listen to what your healthcare professionals tell you. Many of you may have heard in 1918, to celebrate the end of the First World War, Philadelphia had a huge parade. Hundreds of thousands of people came. St. Louis, their public health person says, don't do this, don't bring all these people together because there's a pandemic. And the death rates per capita in Philadelphia were some multiple of what they were in St. Louis. I mean, that's the example that you should give. The other 2 books I've read about the most recent pandemic were about the origins, and contrary to what it says in the New York Times today, I've been pretty persuaded that the origin of the pandemic was in one of these wild animal markets that they have in China, which they outlawed, by the way, in 2005 when the SARS coronavirus pandemic broke out, and they didn't enforce the rules against them. So they continue to have these places where you could buy live civets or raccoon dogs, all kinds of pangolins, these rare animals that were delicacies in China, and you could buy them live in these markets. Anyway, and apparently the virus spread from there, jumped from those animals to us. Anyway, so from the sort of personal development part, study up on the challenges that you face, and from the sort of governing part, try to be as inclusive as possible in your decision. And Nick says we're done. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.